Prepare space deck.
Space deck sealed.
Thrusters engaged.
Thrusting.
Ready for takeoff.
We are ready for takeoff. Wait. Fuck! I left my Slurpee on top of the ship.
Rosa, we'll just get another one later.
You owe me.
This is Captain's Log 001. If you are tuning into this transmission, you are now listening to the Space Babepodyssey.
We are your hosts,
Jubi
and Rosa. Join us on this intergalactic voyage as we discuss the feminine life form and its perception on planet Earth through a science fictional lens across media.
On today's episode, we talk with Dr. Pearson, Earth-renowned Cal State LA science fiction professor, here to share his knowledge and research findings on the topic.
And if you're interested in how fiction and storytelling can create new perspectives and help people imagine new possibilities, science fiction is the place to really look at that.
How did you come to study and eventually teach science fiction or space babeology?
I rapidly kind of moved into science fiction and fantasy, not just as a fan, but as a place where a lot of really important conversations were happening.
What can we understand about Earth through these fictional characters that you often talk about?
Science fiction and fantasy is often a way that we can give a form to things that are otherwise difficult to think and feel about. Nuclear anxiety and dread is a big, vague feeling that's hard to get a grip on. So something like Godzilla, giant lizard, both awesome and scary, is a way of thinking about the terrible destructive power of atomic weapons.
Yeah, it kind of does provide like a therapeutic sense of, oh, this isn't just in my head, or we can kind of visualize it and experience it and then get over it in some kind of way. What are some ways feminine people are represented in science fiction?
One of the strategies that science fiction likes to use is something called satirical reversal, which is taking a kind of hierarchy and flipping it over in ways that kind of reveal how common sense power dynamics often seem. Women writers and queer writers and writers of color were often much more attuned to some of the relationships that were going on. So a lot of those early writers were looking much more directly at gender issues and especially the expression of femininity. I just finished reading Anne Leckie's Ancillary Justice series, which is a relatively recent one that takes place in a space opera empire where she, her is just the default pronoun. And everyone in the story is just used to that. But as American readers, it is often continuously interesting to note the ways that the characters do not care about gender.
How have you felt like the sexualization on Earth has affected these kinds of stories?
Through my own experiences of being non-binary, it's hard to erase the bias the world has set up for you. While I no longer identify as just a woman, my femininity is not something that I can erase. I must fit into a gendered box based off of societal norms.
Having lived in my own experience as a woman online and in a reality that places value based off of sexual promiscuity, it makes me question my own understanding of self. As we look to dismantle the male gaze, the importance of telling female-led stories are just as important as ever.
At the same time, you don't want to say that female characters shouldn't have any connection to sexuality or sensuality at all, because it's a vital part of human experience. It's an important part of agency, is to be able to own and enjoy your own body. So trying to find a balance between showing them presenting characters who can confidently embrace and enjoy their sexuality and sexual agency without creating that sexuality as a spectacle that's mostly there for the audience to enjoy, it's a tightrope. One of the things that we're talking about in my gender and sexuality class is the film Under the Skin from 2014, which is a truly fascinating film in which Scarlett Johansson plays a predatory alien inhabiting a female body. And Scarlett Johansson is an actress who, as a celebrity, has been so relentlessly sexualized that the film kind of actively pushes against it and attempts to desexualize her in very interesting ways. So it's a continuous balancing act that any form of media has to work with. And it can be done in interesting ways. It can just be done in very careful ways, or it can be done in kind of traditional patriarchal and irresponsible ways. But it's not something that I think you can have a right way to do. Like it's a weird achievement that they've pushed back against just the sheer momentum of her sexualization in other films, even other science fiction films like Ghost in the Shell.
Going back to Under the Skin, do you feel
Mm-hmm.
like there's any science fictional elements that contribute to Scarlett Johansson's character design that really emphasize the movie's note?
It's interesting because it is a film that is very science fictional, and it has some sequences that are very abstract in a kind of tradition of cosmic visual abstraction that goes back to 2001. But that's contrasted with a very hyper realistic, gritty cinema style while she's wandering around looking for men to pick up and then feed upon in a fascinating sexual ritual. And in some ways, the kind of intense street level realness of that is interesting because you're just in a normal street in Scotland, but you're viewing it from her alien eyes. And it has an effect that science fiction scholars call cognitive estrangement, which is a fancy way of saying science fiction can make familiar things seem strange. To see this terrifying alien predator who just happens to have the form of a woman do things like go to a nightclub, drive down the street, be catcalled is fascinating. But all of these kinds of conventional moments of gendered embodiment are sharpened or brought into your attention from this alien perspective. And having it be world famous sexualized celebrity, hottest person alive, Scarlett Johansson, who is this consciousness that does not understand or care about any of that, heightens it and just makes it weird in a very interesting way.
And on the other side, to juxtapose against that, do you feel like her character has any similarities to human nature?
Thinking about how contingent a lot of your experience of the world is on the accident of your body, something that you are so identified with and you have some kinds of control over, but not other kinds of control, is an experience that any being with a body would have. Seeing that from the alien perspective can kind of cognitively estrange our relationship to our own bodies.
It's really thought out. Do you feel like her character stands out amongst the other representations in science fiction?
That movie is very much focused on that fulcrum of, are you being sexualized? Is it your sexual agency? In something like the Alien series, where, Sigourney Weaver's character Ellen Ripley is one of the celebrated early quote unquote strong female protagonists, sexy space badass ladies. Managing her presentations of femininity in those films is something the films are very careful about, but it's always kind of in the background because it's not part of the plot of the story. And they're thinking about changing audience tastes and expectations. Can they accept this very traditionally masculine form of action heroism from a femme presenting person? And you can watch as the movies in that series progress how the filmmakers' estimation of where they can meet the audience on that changes. So that's some very interesting work that those films are doing, but that's not necessarily what those films are about in the way that Under the Skin is kind of very much about that balance.
And in Under the Skin, they completely encapsulize what being a woman is like through an alien perspective. One of the director's intentions was to have somebody who was a nobody play the woman in order to keep the credibility of the story, said by Jonathan Glazer in a Film 4 interview. Because of the roles that Scarlett Johansson has previously played, society has set her up to be the end-all, be-all woman. Because of this, having her in this movie play an alien that's playing a character, and that character is a woman, and they set her up to be in a box that, as a society, we have put her in.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways that you could phrase that film is, what would it be like if you could just wrap yourself in Scarlett Johansson's body and walk through the world in it? What power would that give you over people? What would it be like to have that embodiment?
These elements are working hand in hand with the satirical reversal and raising the question, do you really want to be in Scarlett Johansson's skin?
I love that. Just thinking of what it would be like in a day under her skin.
Under the skin.
Yeah. But to wrap up, how do you think we can continue the smooth progression of uplifting feminine voices in science fiction?
I mean, one of the tricks is that media isn't just a purely creative space, it's a business. And as we see from, the variety of strikes right now, it's an increasingly consolidated business. Thinking of it as a progression is certainly something we can do, but it's not going to be smooth. Whereas the people who are making the most interesting media are often trying to take risks. Spaces like podcasting and webcomics and other kinds of more directly creative controlled spaces are often going to be where interesting, genuinely new stuff is going to happen. And that will very slowly filter up the kind of capital ladder until, it might eventually show up in something made by the House of Mouse. So find some exciting small projects to kickstart and be at least a little more forgiving of the folks who are working on those big studio projects. They're often trying to push things forward as far as they can, but the project's heavy and you can't push it very far.
Yeah, that's very true. If there was any last information that you wanted to bring out into the world or put out into space, now's the time.
It's exciting that, more and more folks are interested in science fiction. It has always been something that all kinds of fans were a part of, but gatekeeping has also always been a thing. And it's really nice to see someone who isn't a white male nerd getting out there and publicly exploring this stuff. I think that's great. I do have 2 relatively recent books that I do want to plug. We'll see if our communicator here is going to do it. One of them is this great book, Uneven Futures, by some of my good friends, Jerry Canavan, Sean Gines, and Ida Yoshiniga. If you're thinking about how science fiction can help us think about a lot of interesting stuff that minority folks care about, this is a great place to look. And a book by my great friend David Higgins, Reverse Colonization, which helps answer that question of why science fiction, which is a genre that is so invested in thinking about difference, is so often a place that really dark alt-right forces kind of circle around.
And if you're a student at Cal State LA, please make sure to check out Dr. P's class schedule under Liberal Studies.
Cal State LA is one of the few places that has a science fiction minor. If you're interested in that, you can absolutely get onto that at any time. We host EagleCon every year, which is a really great opportunity for Cal State LA students and people in the community to come in and actually interact with some of the people from the film and entertainment industry who make the science fiction that you love. So, keep an eye out for that. Yeah.
You were just listening to the Space Babepodyssey.
Made in association with Cal State LA Golden Eagle Radio. Special thanks to Dr. Pearson and the Journalism Department. Once again, we are your hosts, Jubi
and Rosa. Join us next time as we travel to other planets and distant lands to discuss the future of the galaxy. Logging off.